Welcome. Thank you for choosing our channel. Help us out by subscribing, liking the video, and leaving a short comment. We greatly appreciate it. Make yourselves comfortable. The lighthouse stood as a lonely sentinel against the infinite gray of the sea. Its white stone tower, a monument to Elara. 5 years since the light had been her only constant companion. Her life was measured in the rhythmic sweep of its beam, the grinding of the gears, the polishing of the great Fresnel lens. It was a life of duty, a legacy she'd inherited, and her grief was a quiet phantom limb, mournful call of the foghorn on misty nights. She moved through her duties with a practiced grace, her hands sure as she wound the clockwork mechanism that turned the light. The tower was her world, a vertical home of iron stairs and thick stone walls that smelled of salt, brass polish, and old ghosts. From the lantern room at the very top, she could see for miles. She watched the fishing boats leave at dawn and return at dusk. She watched the seasons paint the cliffs in different hues, and she watched the moods of the sea, from its placid summer calm to its winter fury. That evening, the fury came with an unnatural speed. The sky, a placid blue only an hour before, had bruised to a deep, violent purple. The wind didn't just rise, it shrieked, clawing at the thick glass of the lantern room with a malevolent intelligence. This was no ordinary storm. It felt ancient, a raw and primal power unleashed upon the world. The waves were not just high, they were monstrous, liquid mountains that crashed against the base of the lighthouse with a force that sent tremors up through the stone floor. Elara's duty was clear. The light must not fail. In a storm like this, ships could be dashed against the hidden reefs in minutes. She checked the oil, trimmed the wick, and polished away the salt spray that the wind hurled against the glass. The great beam sliced through the tempest, a blade of hope cutting through the chaos, a promise of safety in a world gone mad. It was during one of her sweeps of the horizon, her gaze tracking the beam's path across the churning water, that she saw it. A shape, dark and limp, tossed in the violent surf near the jagged rocks at the base of the cliff. It was impossible to be certain through the driving rain and spray, but her heart seized with a cold dread. It looked like a body. Her breath screamed at her to stay inside, to seek shelter from. But the lighthouse keeper's creed was burned into her soul. You do not turn your back on the sea, and you do not turn your back on those in its clutches. David had lived by that code. Herself in a heavy oilskin coat, she lit a scent down the winding stone steps carved into the cliff face. The wind tore at her, trying to rip her from her footing, and the waves exploded below, drenching her in icy water. Each step was a battle against the elements. She found him wedged between two sharp fingers and pushing at his inert form. He was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dark, strange clothing that seemed to shed water. He was unconscious, his face deathly pale against his dark hair. A terrible wound marred his side, a jagged, angry gash that was not bleeding in a way. Instead of a steady flow of red, the edges of the wound seemed to char and smolder, emitting a faint ozone smell even amidst the storm. With a strength born of adrenaline and years of hauling supplies up the cliff, she managed to pull him free from the rocks. He was heavier than he looked, a dead weight against the pull of the tide. She half dragged, half carried him up the slippery steps, her lungs burning, her muscles screaming. By the time she hauled him through the thick wooden door at the base of the lighthouse, she was trembling and utterly spent. She laid him on the rug before the hearth, the firelight casting flickering shadows across his aristocratic features. He was unlike any sailor she had ever seen. His face was all sharp angles and noble lines, a face that belonged on an old coin or a marble statue. She tended to the wound as best she could. As she cleaned away the grime and seawater, she saw that it wasn't a cut. It looked more like a burn, the flesh cauterized in a strange, swirling pattern, almost like a brand. It pulsed with a faint internal energy, a soft violet light that seemed to flicker deep within the tissue. It was a magical wound, a supernatural injury that her rational mind struggled to comprehend. She bandaged it tightly and covered him with every blanket she owned. Throughout the long night, as the storm slowly spent its fury, she sat a vigil by his side. He didn't stir, his breathing shallow but steady. Exhaustion finally claimed her, and she dozed in her chair, lulled by the crackling fire and the receding roar of the sea. She awoke with a start, unsure of what had disturbed her. The cottage was silent, the storm having passed. A soft light filled the room, but it wasn't the dawn. It was coming from him. Elara stared, her heart pounding. A gentle violet luminescence was seeping through the bandages on his side. It pulsed in a slow, rhythmic beat, in time with his breathing. In awe, she crept closer. With trembling fingers, she carefully lifted a corner of the bandage. The sight beneath made her gasp. The wound was gone, not healing, not scarred over, but completely, utterly vanished. In its place, the skin was pale and perfect, marked only by faint silvery lines that mirrored the strange pattern she had seen before. As she watched, even these lines glowed with a final, soft pulse of violet light and then faded into nothing. The man on her floor was not a man. He was something else entirely, something ancient and impossible. A secret the storm had washed up from the depths and laid at her feet. The lighthouse had always protected ships from the dangers of the sea. Now, she realized with a chilling certainty, she had brought the danger inside. The man on the floor did not awaken with a groggy moan, but with a sudden, silent intake of breath. His eyes, a deep, stormy gray that seemed to hold the wisdom of millennia, snapped open and were instantly alert. There was no disorientation, no confusion. He assessed the room in a single sweeping glance. The stone walls, the dying fire, the scent of salt and herbs, and finally, Elara, who stood frozen by the hearth, her hands still hovering over the place where his wound used to be. He sat up, his movements fluid and economical, the blankets pooling around his waist. He looked down at his own at its perfect, healed state. Then, his gaze lifted to meet hers. It was not the look of a grateful survivor, but the ancient, piercing stare of a being weighing 1,000 factors she could not comprehend. "You brought me here," he stated. It was not a question. His voice was a deep baritone, calm and resonant, with a strange, melodic cadence. "You tended to the wound." Elara found her own voice, though it trembled slightly. "It was gone. I saw it heal. I saw the light. What are you?" A long silence stretched. He considered her, his gray eyes searching her face, gauging her fear, her resolve. "My name is Kaelen," he said at last, evading her question entirely. "You have my gratitude. You acted with courage in the storm." "Courage had little to do with it," she countered, a spark of I saw someone in need, but you are not just someone, are you, Kaelen?" He offered a small, sad smile. "No, I am not." He made no move to and seemed to shift, drawn by a rhythmic pulse that Elara, after years in the tower, had long ago learned to ignore. It was the faint, deep thrum of the lighthouse's clockwork mechanism as it turned the great light above them. Kaelen's eyes widened slightly. A look of profound disbelief, of stunned revelation washed over his features. He closed his eyes, his head tilted as if listening to a distant song. Elara could see the tension in his jaw, the subtle frown of concentration. He felt it, an impossible resonance. The pure, focused energy of the lighthouse beam, a product of human engineering and dedication, was vibrating on a frequency that resonated with his own ancient power. More than that, he could feel it reaching across a vast distance, touching the very seals of the prison he guarded, lending them a minuscule but measurable amount of strength. The simple, dutiful act of this mortal woman was, impossibly, helping him do his job. He opened his eyes, the look of shock replaced by a new, heavy understanding. He could not leave, not yet. He had to understand this. His duty, the one that had defined his existence for eons, was now inexplicably tied to this stone tower, and the woman who— "I cannot go," he said, the words sounding heavy, reluctant. "What do you mean?" Elara asked, wary. "My people will be searching for me," he lied, the falsehood tasting like ash in his mouth. "This is the most prominent landmark on this coast. They will see the light and know to come here. I must wait for them." Of what he was, But the thought of him simply vanishing back into the sea, leaving her alone with this impossible secret, was somehow worse. That she was in terrible danger. A man whose wounds healed with magic, who spoke of his people as if they were a certainty, was not someone who would bring peace to her quiet life. "You can stay," she heard herself say, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Until they come." She built a fire and they sat in a tense silence as the sun rose higher, flooding the cottage with light. He stayed in the shadows, away from the direct rays, his skin seeming almost to recoil from their warmth. He asked her questions about the lighthouse, his curiosity sharp and specific. How old was the lens? What fuel did the lamp burn? How often did she have to wind the mechanism? To Elara, they were questions about her life's work. To him, they were a desperate calculation, an attempt to understand the miracle that was keeping his world. For that day, Elara went down to the cove to gather mussels from the rock pools, the familiar task a comfort in its normalcy. It was then that she saw it. Washed up on a patch of sand was a creature unlike any she had ever seen. It was a fish, perhaps, but its scales shimmered with an oily, unnatural iridescence, and its mouth was filled with needle-like teeth arranged in a spiral. Its eyes were milky white, blind, but a faint, malevolent energy seemed to pulse from its dead form. It was a thing of the deep, a creature of absolute darkness that had no business being in the sunlit shallows. Dread washed over her. She had lived on this coast her entire life and had never seen its like. It felt wrong, an aberration. She looked from the dead creature back towards the lighthouse where Kaelen sat in the shadows, a guardian watching a light he desperately needed. She suddenly understood that his presence was not passive. He was not just a survivor waiting for rescue. He was a piece of another world, and his being here was like leaving a door ajar to a place of darkness and wonder. And she was beginning to see the things that were starting to slip through. The days that followed were steeped in a quiet dread. Elara's routine continued. The winding of the clockwork, the polishing of the lens, the meticulous logs. But it was underscored by a new, unnerving vigilance. Each morning she would walk the small cove below the lighthouse, her eyes scanning the tide line not for shells or sea glass, but for horrors. More of the strange, iridescent fish washed ashore, their needle-toothed maws gaping at the sky. One afternoon, she found a crab-like creature with too many joints in its legs and a shell that seemed woven from solidified shadow. They were things that belonged in the crushing dark of the abyss, not in her sunlit world. The nights were worse. The soothing sounds of the sea were replaced by unsettling noises. A wet scraping sound against the rocks below, a high-pitched chittering that seemed to come from just beyond the edge of the light's beam. Fear became a constant, unwelcome guest in the small lighthouse, a third presence alongside her and Kaelen. Kaelen himself grew more distant, more haunted. He spent the daylight hours in the lower levels of the tower, where the stone walls were thickest and the sunlight was a distant memory. At night he would stand in the lantern room with her, not speaking, his stormy gray eyes fixed on the impenetrable darkness over the water. He was a king in exile, watching his kingdom crumble from afar. The tension between them grew, stretched a palpable sense of an encroaching doom. Elara couldn't bear it any longer. The unknown was a poison, more terrifying than any revealed truth could be. One night, as he stood his silent vigil by the lens, "I cannot do this anymore, Kaelen," she said, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through the silence. "I find monsters on my beach. I hear things crawling in the dark. You are waiting for people who are not coming, aren't you?" She took a breath, her gaze unwavering. "These things, they are coming for you. I have a right to know what danger I'm sheltering. I have a right to know what you are." He turned to her slowly, and the sorrow in his eyes was so profound it nearly broke her resolve. He had tried to shield her, but he saw now that his silence was a greater cruelty than the truth. "You are right," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of ages. "I am not a shipwrecked sailor, and my wound was not from any rock or piece of wood." He gestured out towards the dark sea. "Deep beneath these waters, deeper than any of your ships can travel, there is a prison, a gateway. Your ancestors called it the Abyssal Gate. My duty for longer than your family line has existed has been to guard it. I am its warden." Elara listened, mesmerized, the fantastical words somehow sounding like absolute truth in the quiet solemnity of the lantern room. "There are things sealed within that gate," Kaelen continued. "Ancient, mindless things born of hunger and darkness. The storm was no ordinary storm. It was a surge of pressure from the abyss, a test against the seals. In reinforcing them, I was struck by a backlash of raw, chaotic energy. It wounded me and cast me out, adrift, until I washed upon your shore." He finally looked at her. "Your light, Elara. This lighthouse. Its beam is pure, focused, constant. I do not know how, but its harmonic frequency resonates with the magic of the seals. It strengthens them. It is helping me do my duty from afar. But my absence, it has weakened the warden is not at his post, and the prisoners are testing the bars. The things you see on the shore are the weakest of them, slipping through the cracks." The truth settled over Elara, vast and terrifying. Her simple, lonely duty was a linchpin in a cosmic battle. The light. She was a guardian of the world's safety. As if summoned by his words, a deafening screech erupted from below, followed by the horrible sound of claws scraping against stone. A monstrous shape was ascending the cliff face, a horror of slick, dark skin and too many limbs, its blind face turning towards the light at the top of the tower. It was larger than the others, a true breacher, its intent clear. "Extinguish the light and the woman who kept it," Kaelen commanded, his body transforming from a weary exile to a powerful warrior. He moved in front of Elara, positioning himself between her and the glass of the lantern room. The creature lunged at the glass, which shuddered but held. Kaelen placed his palm against the thick pane. He closed his eyes, and the air around him crackled with energy. A deep, violet light, the same light Elara had seen heal his wound, now emanated from him, an aura of immense power. "Be gone!" he roared, his voice no longer human but a command that echoed with the pressure of the deep ocean. He slammed his hand forward. A wave of pure, concussive force erupted from him, passing through the glass and striking the creature. It was not a physical blow, but a wave of absolute authority. The breacher shrieked, its form blasted from the cliff face, and it tumbled back down into the churning darkness of the sea below. Silence returned, broken only by Elara's ragged breathing. She stared at Kaelen, who stood panting, the violet light slowly fading from around him. She had just witnessed power beyond her comprehension, a force of nature personified. But she felt no fear. In its place was a profound, startling clarity. Her life was not small. Her duty was not meaningless. The lonely lighthouse, her inheritance of grief, was a weapon in a war she now understood, and she was not alone in her vigil. She stepped forward and placed her hand on his arm. He looked at her, expecting to see terror in her eyes. Instead, he saw a steady, unwavering resolve that mirrored his own. "You are the warden of the gate," she said, her voice clear and strong. He nodded slowly. "And you," he replied, a sense of wonder in his voice, "are the keeper of the light." In that moment, their fates intertwined, their lonely duties merging into a single ship. They were two sentinels, one of ancient magic, one of humble human dedication, standing together against the encroaching darkness. He could not leave the light that strengthened his prison, and she would not abandon the man who guarded the world. Her grief had found its purpose. His eternal burden had found a partner. They looked out at the sea together, no longer just a man and a woman, but a team, a promise, a beacon of hope against the terrors of the deep. Sometimes the small, lonely duties we perform every day are more important than we could ever imagine. A single light, kept burning through grief and solitude, can hold back an ocean of darkness. True purpose is not always a grand adventure, but the choice to stand firm, to share a burden, and to become a beacon of hope for another. Thank you for watching this tale of love and duty. If you were captivated by Elara and Kaelen's story, please help our channel grow by liking this video, subscribing, and leaving a comment below. We'll see you at the next high tide with a new story.